Thank you to the Porto Academy for the invitation. It's a pleasure being here. I'll try to do this short and as painless as possible, so we can all go in queue for our food afterwards. I'll show you 10 projects, about 100 slides, but I will go through these projects pretty quickly. I understand that I will be a bit superficial on most of these projects. I will kind of try to express to you the main ideas, the main ambitions, and the main goals. And we might lose some of the details, but I don't think that matters. I think you can pick up these things in a more subjective way in the images. As you might know, I'm actually from Belgium, but through certain I don't know, I kind of ended up with an office in Mexico. I run that office with 3 partners, Abel from Argentina and Carlos and Victor from Mexico. So I speak here on behalf of the 4 of us. Let's see. Okay, this is the first project. It's called House of Arts and Culture in Beirut, Lebanon. It's a very particular site. It's a bit of a square plot next to a sort of inner city highway, close to the city center of Beirut. And we were asked, it was an open competition to design a house for culture, which basically has 2 main theater halls, space for contemporary art, movie theater, etc. In the beginning of our project, we always try to make this kind of abstract models. First of all, because when we work with models, it allows us to watch the 4 partners at the same time and the people in the office to watch the same objects, the same proposals in front of a computer screen. If you're 4, it doesn't work. Like with 2, you can share a computer screen, maybe with 3, but with 4 is difficult. And one of these things we start to like about this scheme is that we might have a sort of these supporting columns all around the building, and these supporting columns, by putting one layer behind another layer, it could almost become a sort of a filigrane, sort of theater curtain. Here you see a bit the idea. And then here you see more or less how we adapted it to the site. So towards the highway, these columns are like more denser, closer to each other, so it forms a sort of acoustical barrier between the highway and the building. And towards the city center, we have these more open terraces. Here you see a first attempt to show this in a 3D image, where you see here like this dense superposition of columns, and here like these more open terraces towards this small square and towards the city center, a model of the same project. And here you can start to see how then the sunlight starts to draw all the different lines. So apart from the columns, and you still have the lines of the shadow that go over this these stepped volumes. Here you see the main entrance and how basically each and every one of these terraces is related to a sort of interior program. Some of the columns, they work under pressure, and some work under traction, like for example here, where you can see that this big opening is held up by these long tension cords. And then again, sort of very simple, we always try to do sort of very simple materialization. Here we thought maybe we should only put material, texture, color in the floors of the building to differentiate different levels and to create a sort of combination between these diagonal lines of the sunlight casting these shadows and the lines of the floor. So that was project number 1 already. Call center Churubusco. I'll show you a lot of low budget projects because in the low budget project there's also sometimes a sort of an urgency, a sort of precarity, which sometimes becomes pretty interesting. As an architect, your choices are limited, and you sometimes it obliges you to take different solutions, to work with different materials you might have not worked before, or which at the first glance might not seem that ideal. This is a call center. So call center is basically where you have like people calling you to try to sell you credit cards and holidays. So basically these spaces you have to imagine full with computers and people with telephones. And basically we had to think of this entrance space. This is very how would I say, a very functional, very straightforward interior space. But basically, in this entrance space, we wanted to give the space a sort of presence and a sort of architectonical quality. We had to work with, we decided to work with these metal profiles, these rolled metal profiles. It's like the cheapest material we can work with. The area, that area of Mexico City is also a semi-industrial area. And these are the normal panels you normally see on industrial boxes outside of the city. They're, in this case, they're like 94 centimeters wide. Oh, or no, I think it was like 67 centimeters wide. And basically, what we try to do we thought if we could make one of these, if we could make a facade that consisted out of a sort of precise rhythm of open and closed stripes, like one layer, one stripe of glass and one stripe of these metal profiles, then maybe the whole combination could obtain a certain elegance. Not so far away from the product we just saw in Beirut, where all of a sudden these continuous vertical lines could then create, maybe I should push it harder. Okay, here you see it. It's not Swiss detailing, it's industrial work. It's very basic. But here you can more or less see how then, with the light coming from the inside or the light coming from the outside, it kind of works and it kind of becomes a sort of elegant, sort of industrial box converted in sort of elegant curtain. Here you see basically how also the doors, we try to kind of just integrate them in the same system. And basically by these kind of ramps and staircases going up, you can find their position easily on the facade. And also by the not so precise detailing, of course. It's a bit difficult, the thing. This is a competition we won in September. Competition we did together with a friend of us, Isaac Broid. He's an architect of just a bit older generation in Mexico City. Since as a somewhat younger office, we're not yet invited to the invited competitions they're holding. So basically, we knocked the door at our colleagues and we said, "Can we, if you need somebody to support you in your competitions, please let us know. We really would like to have access to these invited competitions." And this is one of the first ones we did then with Isaac Broid. It's Mexican style. That means that sometimes you're confronted with very short time periods. So in this case, we had to make an auditorium, cultural auditorium. So it's sort of a multi-purpose theater space where you can have talk, lectures, but even some theater, even some music. And we had to rebuild a sort of auditorium they built in the 80s in front of this amazing archaeological site in the city of Cuernavaca. So to be able to work in Mexico with such a rich cultural history, but also to work in front of this archaeological site is already a fantastic given issue. In our projects, what we try to do, since we're 4 partners, all the decisions we make, all the architecture we produce, they cannot be based on sort of very intuitive or visceral sentiments. We kind of have to make an agreement, and one way or another, I think our architecture is also a process of compromises, of talking, of negotiating things on the table. And in that sense, for example, these very basic, very simple geometric forms, they allow us to kind of create very clear and very definable ambition for us. And it's a way that the 4 partners in between us, we can both be on the same page about the project. And a project for us is working when, for example, we find a sort of mathematical straitjacket, sort of mathematical, how would I say, key, sort of solution in which we know that if we make things larger, it won't work anymore. If we make it shorter, it won't work anymore. So nobody, not one of the 4 partners of us, we have to make a decision. It's defined by certain external circumstances, which of course are always a bit arbitrary, but I think this project is maybe a good example to understand this. Here, the existing auditorium which we were to rebuild, which we also wanted to rebuild because we understood if this is a site with pre-Hispanic remains, that means that probably this whole area is a site with pre-Hispanic remains. And the last thing we wanted is that the first moment that we put a shovel into the ground, that we will dig up some new pyramids and we will have to stop our building site. So basically what we try to do is we reuse the foundations of this existing building. So in that sense, this form, this trapezoid or triangular form was almost defined. Here you see a picture I got from the internet because I don't have an aerial picture of it, but here you see actually the beautiful pyramid, and here you see the auditorium. And I think everybody can read that there's a sort of weird relation between the two. They're not on the same central axis, but they're also not really related in proportion. And that was for us the main thing we had to try to resolve. We had to reuse this system, these foundations, but we had to bring it in a smarter relation, in a more in proximity in relation to the existing archaeological site. Basically, what we did, we used the same foundations. We made a triangle of the trapezoidal building. The lower platforms we could put an extra foundation, just slap on the floor. And basically, what we did, part of this triangle, we kind of cut it in half, and we had one volume that could relate in a much more direct way with the pyramid. Oh, here you can see it. This entrance, this foyer, this main foyer that kind of opens up to the pyramid. Then the volume, which is like pushed as much as we could under the ground with the main theater hall. Then, of course, a sort of maybe sort of more obvious public walk to the roof, which then also could give a sort of introduction to the archaeological site, which now you can hardly ever see from above. And then the view from the other side, here you see it again, this existing structure, and then this half of the triangle that kind of lifts up and searches for this direct relation to the existing pyramid. Oh, anyway, they were just like, here you see a bit how it works on the inside. Shoebox theater, here you have the balconies to create a more intimate atmosphere. And basically it's the main foyer, who is like in direct relation to the pyramid, and there's a smaller foyer in relation to a patio here on the upper side. That's a pavilion. At a certain moment we were asked to design a pavilion for the culture fair. Mexico City has this huge square in the middle of the city called the Zócalo. It's 200 by 200 meters square. Basically what they asked us to do at a certain moment, every year there's a culture fair, so all the countries, Portugal, Spain, United States, Australia, they all come and present their products, their tourism. And this year, Mexico City, they wanted to have a pavilion that talked about Mexico City and how Mexico City was related to immigrations, to certain migration flows. We got the commission 2.5 months before the opening of the cultural fair, so we knew that we had to act quick. And we also, we were told that somebody would do an exhibition, a museography and an exhibition within our pavilion. Our pavilion was to house this exhibition. Knowing the Mexican government and knowing how things work in Mexico, we kind of knew that there would never be an exhibition in there because the time frame was too short. And we said, let's not depend on the content. Let's not make sort of beautiful empty container because we're not really sure what will happen inside of this space. Let's make a building that even if nothing happens inside, it already has a certain presence, it has a certain materiality, and maybe even the idea of like walking up, having a sort of overview over the square with this kind of walkway above the square, and maybe coming down as a symbolic way, kind of representing the idea of migrating and arriving to Mexico City. Maybe that could already be a theme on itself. So we started working with our structural engineers to see how we could, in a sort of smart way, in a sort of fast way. We had 7 or 8 days to build it on site, so we could prefabricate all these elements in the workshop and to build everything on site. Working with engineers, they start to ask all these extra bracings, and these bracings, the work together with the engineers, they really made and defined the texture of the whole pavilion. Here you see a bit how it's built, so we could work with different craftsmen on different, we could make these facades lying on the floor, so it's very easy, just do one by one. We can have a crew working here, here, and here, and then basically we just had to lift them up, connect them. Here you see already the pieces for the roof prepared. Connect, and this is then the final result. Sort of, this is actually just a plastic foil to protect it from the rain. And here you see basically how like the bracing, the materiality, the wood, the different layers of wood, the different depths, and the way the sun plays on it creates this, yeah, sort of texture, almost like sort of basket weaving or something, where there's sort of a richness in materiality. These are like our different friends of culture. Here you see opening to watch inside the pavilion. Here you see this materiality. And the inside. This was finally the exhibition they put on the inside. So it just stenciled some information on Mexico City on the inside of the pavilion. And as it happens so many times, in the end, and they just use the pavilion to as a sort of space to organize talks, events, etc. No? As it happens so many times in the cultural center and museum nowadays, because of a lack of culture, lack of content, they try to fill it up with events. No? With the roof structure, basically you see the triangular system, and then some extra supports. Oh, that was quick. Now, who made this building? Does anybody know that? It's a CISA building. No, that's actually I should finish my conference with CISA. This is a competition we did in Argentina, in Rosario, for a small, for a public library. This is the plot. We were asked to, it's actually, no, actually this is the whole plot. This is a sort of old emplacement for the army, and they're going to convert it into a park very soon. And here they mounted a public library. The library was pretty small and the plot is very big, so we kind of had to think about the way, how can we make use of this space. Oh, that's it, okay. So basically we said, let's try to make one single long volume, a volume that kind of looks over this park to establish as much as possible a relationship with this park. And let's try to make a volume of a library in which this whole facade could be glass. So we oriented it to the north facade. In the southern hemisphere, I look at the Chilean. At the southern hemisphere, the north facade is a facade where you don't have the sun hitting the glass. And basically, we created all the reading spaces, all the office, all the library spaces in this 10.8 meter wide volume. Here you can see it. Here you have all the books, the reading tables, a service strip with toilets, computer rooms, and basically everything that would not fit inside, like sort of playroom for kids, the cafeteria, a small movie theater, a bigger auditorium, and a exhibition space, we would put it outside. In that way, we could create here a sort of park, sort of local green area that kind of is a sort of hinge between the CISA building and our new building. And this is the facade towards the park, sort of modular facade made of 3 rows of the same glass modules. And here then a sort of impression of the building, in which then finally the only thing that this building is really about, the books, become the only thing that really gives the building color, texture, and a presence at the park. So here you see more or less how it works. There's different accesses to the service space, and then all these books. So basically, it's sort of long horizontal bookshelf that stands next to the park. It's a bit strange, this thing. So I'm jumping back and forward a little bit. This is a plot site not so far away from Mexico City. It's a city called Valle de Bravo. It's about a 2-hour drive from Mexico City, and our clients had a plot just really in the first, just in front of the lake. We started to work with this. Maybe I should just do it manually. Maybe that works better. I'm going the wrong way. So basically we said, yeah, let's take advantage of some very obvious things. Of course, we want to have like long volumes to have as much as possible contact to the water. And let's see how, with the slope of the plot, with the topography, we could kind of stack these different volumes one on top of the other, and to create this zigzag building going down. Maybe it's interesting to say here that although the basic idea is based on this stacking of these simple boxes, it's a way to communicate this architecture. Maybe the real essence of the architecture is just not in that stacking, it's just more in all the residual spaces. I'll come back to that later. So you see from the cities, from the little town, the building has a very different character. It's partly because of urban regulations that we need a certain materiality, but it's also because we think it's perfectly okay to have a building that has a sort of different reading from the outside, and a sort of more and a different reading and a different complexity upon entering the building. Here you see the local stone, small openings in the windows, the simple plaster work, and here from the other side it's a completely different reading and almost sort of modernist stacking of different volumes. Here you see actually a bit of both, no? In this in-between space where you're like half on the street and half looking towards the lake. And it's actually, although the project is maybe really about all these boxes, it's actually more or less in all these moments of leftover spaces, of encounters, of solutions that I think that the project becomes more interesting. Here you see actually how a sort of straight stair is cut through the building. It just turns up here, and how then the different spaces are organized. Each of these volumes then has a terrace on the space below. Wrong way again. Here you see that again. It's also a pleasure to work in Mexico because in general the materiality is good. You can work with very, very precise craftsmen on site. And here you see again a sort of detailing in which we try to materialize this concrete slab on top of another concrete slab in order to make these volumes as readable as possible. Our project tried to always be very legible, very clear in their formal and their geometric intentions. Here's some kind of detailing, and the interesting part is that all this detailing you can basically work it on site with the local craftsmen. This is another house we did in a proposal we did for a client in the same town. Does anybody have a normal piece of paper? Maybe our booklets? Just a piece of paper. This is our client. We bought this piece of land. It's a very beautiful, yeah, you can see the view over the lake is fantastic. It's a very steep plot. But the first thing the client said, he said, yeah, I really love it, but I hate slopes. I really wanted a flat piece of land. We said, yeah, then maybe that's not the best piece of land to buy, but we'll see what we can do. So basically the first thing what we had to do is try to see how could we make for him, try to give him flat area. So basically we said, let's put a sort of square, horizontal square on top of this sloped plot, because if you make, and we place it kind of diagonally into the hill, because if you make these ground retaining walls, and if you have to retain ground, they kind of bend over. No, you kind of have to put a lot of structure. You have to anchor them into the soil. And we said if we maybe turn it 45 degrees and we do it diagonally, then if we have these walls, they can work almost as a sort of arch or something to take up the lateral forces. This is something we started working with, and we really immediately liked the idea because we could create a sort of artificial flat part on top of this, on this slope. Here you see it. So the corner in the back will be a very enclosed corner with very high walls next to it. And the corner in the front is like really, it has a really high relation to the floor below. It's almost like the Titanic, you know, like King of the World, you know, when Leonardo DiCaprio and the other woman stand on this frontal point. But there's really this moment where you can really have a sort of a very dramatic relation to the lake. The house is very simple because he wanted to do things in two different phases. We said, let's first build a very simple bungalow, sort of cottage on top of this platform. Here you can live. Actually, these are two sections of the same project. Here you can see, here you have basically this building where you can live. Here in the first phase, he has his bed here. You use this, and this is all some foundation works which are already built, but we just leave them empty in the beginning. We do not use, we do not provide any materiality of this space, and we leave this open. In the second phase, you start going downstairs, and you use this as your main bedroom and your guest bedrooms. Sort of a view of how we imagine it. The house is very simple, two pitched roof, and half of the house is exterior. So this is all the exterior terrace. This is all like to protect you from sun and rain, and this is basically your interior space. So actually, the real interior space is only half of this house. It's basically the same again. This is a house in Tlayacapan. We call it our recycled house. There's this very interesting sort of visionary hippie architect from the 60s, 70s in Mexico called Juan José Díaz Infante. And he made these prototypes for housing. It's basically like a surfboard. So we have sort of foam core covered with resin on both sides. And in the 70s, he kind of, close to Mexico City, he almost made a whole village of these elements. Now we have a client who's a friend of my partner Victor, Silke. That's her when she was 1 year and 5 months old. She used to live with her parents in the 70s in one of these like little prototypes. It's a very beautiful narrative. At a certain moment, her father gets sick. No, actually, at a certain moment, her father sells this house because he has financial trouble. So he sells this house somewhere in the 80s. And a few years ago, in like 2007, the father gets sick. And before dying, he says he wants to leave something very special to his kids. And he searches, and in one of the garbage belts around Tepoztlán, which is the name of the town, around Tlayacapan, he finds still these shells of the house they used to live in the 70s. So he gives it as a present to his daughter. The daughter is happy, moved, but at the same time she doesn't know what to do with these things. She has no money. So she buys a very cheap plot of land close to Tlayacapan. Unfortunately, she also has a very tall husband. And these houses, they are beautiful. They have a sort of spatial quality. At a certain time, they're very low. They look a bit like midget, like hobbit houses. No? So basically, what we said, and I think sometimes your architectural projects, like for example in this case, when you're confronted already with a very precise, defined product, where I think your intervention is not so necessary. We said the only thing that we might have to do, we might just make it a bit more spacious, and we kind of build these very simple concrete walls to lift up these volumes a bit more, about 1 meter, 1 meter 10. We actually do sort of height difference as well, but like we lift it up a meter to just give the whole house more quality. Since this was a project with very limited resources as well, we just made a very rough concrete, since that's basically the cheapest way to work. All recycled wood. Here you see a bit construction site, how these volumes are placed on top of this thing. And basically with 4 people you can lift these shells on top of this, on these volumes. It's really, here you see how it works. There's not much you have to do as an architect. You know, you kind of define some storage spaces, bedrooms. This is sort of living area, entrance. And basically what we did, the same concrete texture we used on the walls, these very rough concrete walls, we kind of used the same formwork to just press it into the wet concrete to make these outdoor terraces. You just only have 2 materials, this rough concrete and this very smooth polyester modules. A small swimming pool in the garden, and this is already when the grass started growing, the concrete on the outside, etc. This is the inside. It's not decorated the way I would do it, but it doesn't matter. I think you can basically see a bit how the spatial qualities of this original prototype are very much there. We just added some steps here. We thought that it was nice to kind of differentiate in a very subtle way, a sort of day area and from the bedrooms, which are just behind it. I think it's important sometimes to, as an architect, just to be able to shut up, to kind of listen to what has to be done. School of Architecture, what is it again? School of Art, Architecture and Design in a competition, an open competition in Finland. They basically asked us to design these 3 schools. It's actually next to Alvar Aalto buildings. It's a fantastic, beautiful campus in Espoo. This is the Aalto building you might know, the central offices. And basically, when we studied a bit the program, we discovered that a school of art, design, and architecture, they basically have the same spaces. Like you need working spaces, like ateliers, which need sort of big bay widths, high ceilings. You need like classrooms, which have a specific size. You need like workshops for metal working, for wood, etc. So basically, instead of making 3 different buildings or a group or a building like with 3 different departments, we said let's not do it that way, but let's just organize the groups of let's make different buildings with different typologies of spaces. So this is a little tower with office cubicles. This is a slab with classrooms. This is a larger building with bigger bay widths to house all the studios. Here you can see more or less how it works. There are these different buildings with different typologies, different structural systems, and they're basically connected by a circle. So in the summer, you could use the square or the other outer spaces to go from building to building. And in the harsh winters in Finland, you could just use this underground corridor to go from space to space. Here you see this underground corridor and access to the different buildings, connections to the parking lots, to the metro, to the existing buildings, etc. Here you see a bit how this underground corridor works. It brings you to all the different buildings, views from the campus, the relation with existing buildings in the landscape design. And the north facades are completely clad in brass, creating this view arriving at the campus. I think this is the last project. This is a house in Tequesquitengo. They have all fantastic names, all the little towns in Mexico. Tequesquitengo. I will not speak Indian languages for you. I cannot do that. This is the plot. It's here you can see the house. Here you can see the existing house. It's remodeling. You're going for the food already, right? Hey. Here you see the 3 modules of the existing house. And so basically, with a very low budget, we had to make this house bigger and more enjoyable. We basically knew that we had to add rooms on the lower floor, while the upper floor is actually the nicest space, because from the upper floor we have a view to the lake, and from the lower floor not. So the real issue was how to connect this upper floor to the lower floor. That was one of the crucial parts. Then the other one was how, without having any money, how can we make really a sort of spectacular architectonical gesture, and we were lucky. We had these extremely beautiful trees. So we said, okay, if we can let these trees that stand here on this sloped piece of grass, if we can make these trees really make them play a fundamental role, then the house can have a complete different look. So basically what we did, we added this volume above with an extra bedroom, this volume below, and we created this in-between terrace. This sort of in-between terrace with a swimming pool, the beautiful tree growing out of it, the existing stairs. And here, actually the house, it didn't have any cross ventilation, so it was actually one roof, where you see number one, we opened the roof. So with these three little gestures, we could basically resolve everything in a pretty simple way. You see the terrace halfway between the different levels. So here you see, actually, until here, the existing house, we use the same hand trailing. We just asked the blacksmith to continue the same language. Here you see this terrace that is really directly connected to the floor below with the new bedrooms and to the floor above. The original staircase only ran to here, so we had to add, it had a concrete base. We kind of encapsulated the concrete base in a sort of new concrete stair, and then basically one of the most important things was we used this material, sort of next to the road going there. You have these people firing bricks and firing these clay tiles. They are very beautiful, and these clay tiles, they kind of gave us the materiality for the whole project, and we contrasted it with a little bit of blue paint for the metalwork. Here you see the same thing again. So that is how this space is contained by this low concrete wall, sort of swimming pool, the staircase, which is like original, and the added part to add these 4 extra steps. The roof we cut out to make the space cross ventilate. Basically on the inside we didn't do much. You see like very basic design for the kitchen. We reused everything we could, like fridges and ventilators, etc. The same thing. Here the entrance, sort of the entrance space to the 3 different bedrooms. And also this space, these 2 doors, these outer doors, they can close, so it really becomes sort of closed block when you're not there. And that's then from the inside of one of the bedrooms. Here you see the constructive system. It's called in Spanish vigueta en bovedilla. Vigueta y bovedilla, like the sort of the cheapest way you can make construction in Mexico. So pre-stressed concrete beams with this cement infill, and that's basically used in all the new parts, and it's left visible. And that's then again a view towards the front, towards the lake, which you can see maybe a little bit in the back. The access to the house. Yeah, that's it for today. Thank you.